lived on the outer stretch of Kansas, where the wind carried farther than the fences, and the houses sat wide enough apart that nighttime sound moved without direction. My home was an old wooden structure, its boards reacting to temperature shifts as though they remembered previous seasons. Most nights stayed quiet, the kind of quiet where every small vibration inside the walls seemed intentional. But midnight broke that quiet, not once or twice, but with a consistency that became part of the house's pattern. The surrounding farms kept dogs for warning, not companionship. Their usual behavior scattered across hours, random barks, alert calls, noise that came and went with passing trucks. But at precisely 12, they unified. Every farm dog turned toward the same unseen point beyond the fields. Their voices leveled into one long note, neither rising nor shifting, like a held breath stretched across the land. It was the sameness of the sound that marked the difference, the way it settled rather than echoed. My dog reacted differently. He never joined the midnight call. He didn't even turn toward the windows. The moment the clock reached 12, he moved behind me quickly, hitting the floor with enough force that dust rose from between the boards. He aligned himself with the empty air just above my shoulder. The same point every night, as if something invisible stood there with defined height. His breathing changed in increments, short, deep, a sudden sharp intake. The rhythm followed no instinct I recognized. His pupils narrowed toward the same empty spot while his body leaned forward in a guarded stance. He dragged his claws along the grain of the boards, not across them. Each movement drew a thin sound, controlled and measured. He adjusted his paws the same distance every time, as if responding to small shifts I couldn't see. When the air pressure inside the room changed, the difference showed in my clothes first. They pulled slightly toward the hallway, though the windows stayed shut. Even the door frames trembled without moving, the kind of vibration that suggested displacement rather than wind. He didn't growl at me. He didn't growl past me. His warning pressed behind my back at the empty space he tracked nightly. I didn't turn. My body held its angle the way his posture directed. When the sequence finished, he always stopped at the threshold to the hallway. The long corridor ended with a full-length mirror the previous owner had installed. The mirror reflected more than the light allowed. Some nights it showed the refrigerator. Some nights it showed nothing at all, as if depth had been removed from the glass. Tonight he froze sooner. His eyes locked on the mirror before the air settled. His body lowered, weight balanced forward, attention fixed not on the reflection but the right-hand corner beside the mirror, the seam where two walls met. That corner, normally touched by leftover kitchen light, absorbed the glow entirely. Light slid past it without illuminating it. The shadow above it never shifted, even when the refrigerator switched on behind me. I never turned fully toward the corner. Instead, I observed its outline from the edge of my vision. The angle looked wrong, sharper, deeper. The boards under my feet felt softer there, like the pressure beneath them pulsed upward at irregular intervals. Air drifted out of that corner carrying a metallic cold, the kind produced by unused vents rather than open windows. The surface of the seam looked recessed, as though it belonged to a different geometry than the hallway it sat in. My dog pressed his shoulder into my leg, not urging me forward or backward, but anchoring himself. His breath shortened into timed bursts. The fur along his spine rose in a slow ripple aligned with something unseen. He stepped closer to the seam, claws hooking lightly into the groove between boards. Dust shifted without lifting. His attention narrowed into a line so precise it felt like he monitored movement too fine for the human eye. The boards near the corner held no resonance. When the refrigerator hummed, the vibration in the floor broke around the seam, bypassing that section entirely. My own shadow stretched along the hallway in delayed motion. The reflection of my outline lagged behind the light source, following an unfamiliar rhythm. I didn't adjust my head. I only noticed the discrepancy in the timing of the edges. Then his focus shifted. Without warning, he turned fast toward the front door, claws cutting into the floor at a sharper angle. He crossed the room and planted himself against the lower panel of the door, paws digging at the frame. He wasn't trying to leave. He pressed the door as though something had moved places, either behind the wall or behind us, without sound. When I approached, the cold leaking under the door felt normal, almost cleaner than the air inside the house. The interior atmosphere stayed heavy, unmoving. I reached for the handle. The metal reflected no light. The temperature climbed my arm in a straight line. The moment my fingers closed around it, he moved. His body pressed against my leg with intentional force, pushing me back. His breathing pattern broke. Some breaths shallow, some deep, none aligned with his ribs. For a moment, the sound resembled the rhythm of human speech without forming words. Behind us, another set of steps formed. Not synchronized with mine or his, just weight pressing into the boards. The pattern held no urgency, only existence. The clock above the kitchen doorway didn't tick. The hands didn't move. Even the ceiling fan's shadow froze, its shape fixed against the wall like a painted silhouette. I released the handle. The draft under the door changed direction, slipping outward now, brushing across my ankles. His fur lifted again, but not in a continuous line. It rose in thin segments, like separate shapes tracing along his spine. One shadow on the floor stretched toward the door in an angle that didn't match either of our bodies, bending slowly even after the light stopped flickering. I turned slightly toward the hallway. The boards near the bedrooms looked flatter. The air trembled at the far end, depth shifting like something submerged beneath water. My dog turned back as well, his body aligning with the corridor. When he exhaled, the sound traveled straight to the mirror. He stepped away from the door and blocked the hallway with exact positioning. His reflection did not match. The surface of the mirror held a depth that didn't mirror the room. The angle appeared altered, the hallway inside the glass too long or too compressed. He stood frozen, pointed, anchored. He didn't move at all. The boards under him held his weight without shifting, and the air around his outline felt thinner than the rest of the hallway, as though something had passed through before I reached him. I stayed a few steps behind, watching the controlled rise of his rib cage, each breath measured like he was tracking movement I still couldn't see. When I stepped closer, the mirror at the end of the corridor reacted a moment late. Not dramatically, just enough that the glass failed to follow my motion in real time. My reflection stood inside the frame, but the head lifted half a second after mine, the delay clear enough to register, yet subtle enough that the hallway light didn't acknowledge it. My dog kept his focus on the right edge of the mirror, not the surface. He stared into a dark strip behind the glass where the hallway light never settled correctly. The air in front of the mirror shook with a faint ripple, thin and vertical, the way heat bends the space above asphalt. Only colder, sharp enough that each vibration dulled the sound around it. I approached the mirror slowly, not turning my head fully, letting the chipped frame come into view one line at a time. The glass seemed to pull inward the closer I got, bending the edges of the reflection as though the surface wasn't rigid. My dog didn't follow my movement. He stayed anchored beside me, breathing in the same slow sequence he had held since the hallway changed. When I reached out, the air between my hand and the mirror dropped in temperature instantly, not gradually, just a sudden, metallic cold, like touching the inside of a freezer door. Before my palm touched the surface, something behind the glass pressed outward. The pane bulged for a second, pushed from the inside by a flat, undefined shape. Not a hand, not fingers, just pressure, deforming the surface outward before retracting just as fast. Dust lifted from the frame in a narrow line and drifted sideways, pulled toward the right edge. The hallway light shifted direction slightly, tilting toward the glass as if bent by another source I couldn't see. None of this produced sound. The silence stayed consistent, but the motion of the dust marked every disturbance in the air. I stepped back and reached for the cloth folded on the nearby chair. The fabric rose into the mirror's reflection half a second late, the same delay repeating with every movement. I raised my arm. The reflection followed too slowly. My dog still didn't look at the reflection. He watched the dark gap behind the glass like it was widening, even though the frame didn't change shape. When I lifted the cloth toward the surface, the glass reacted again. A swell, soft and round, pushed outward from the center before withdrawing. Then I covered the mirror. Even under the cloth, the pressure behind the glass didn't stop. The fabric rose once, then settled, pulsing slightly as though something inside adjusted itself. The boards beneath the mirror changed the way they held sound. Footsteps began behind the cloth, not approaching, not retreating, just space too far apart to match any person. Each step carried the weight of something learning how to place pressure along the floor. My dog's breathing shifted again. Long exhale, short inhale, long inhale. Then stillness. Dust slid inward along the edges of the cloth. The hallway dimmed, the light pulling away from the covered surface. My dog turned his head toward me slowly. His eyes caught no reflection at all, flat, absorbing the hallway without returning any shine. Then the pupils shifted on their own, changing shape without matching his breath or the light. I stepped back once. He followed the exact distance with absolute precision, pupils contracting and widening in a pattern that didn't belong to him. The cloth lifted one more time from the inside. When the cloth rose that last time, it didn't fall back the way fabric should. It stayed suspended for a moment, held from beneath by a pressure without weight. The bottom hem lifted first, as if something inside the mirror adjusted its position and pushed upward with careful intent. Then the cloth lowered again, slow enough for the air underneath it to redistribute in a thin line along the floorboards. My dog didn't react to the movement. He kept his posture aligned with mine, eyes absorbing the hallway light instead of reflecting it. When I stepped to the side, he matched the distance exactly. No hesitation, no miscalculation, his paws landing with deliberate pauses that didn't match the length of his legs. Each tap lasted too long, dragging slightly before lifting again, as though the structure beneath his fur had been rewritten into something longer than his actual limbs. The boards responded differently, not with a crisp knock of canine claws, but with a softened echo stretched out across the hallway. The sound didn't travel straight. It split, moving down both ends of the corridor as if the house couldn't decide where the weight belonged. I kept my focus on the mirror. Even under the cloth, the surface behind it pressed outward once more, the fabric shifting in a shallow pulse. Dust gathered closer to the frame, sliding inward like the air carried a current that pulled toward some unseen point. The dimness deepened. Shadows at the baseboards widened despite the overhead light remaining unchanged. My dog's breathing no longer resembled breath. His chest rose without drawing in air. His sides expanded out of rhythm with his ribs. The motion followed a cycle that matched nothing living in the hallway. He took another step toward me. This time, his shadow divided cleanly into two. One followed the kitchen light in a normal direction. The other pressed against the far wall, delayed by a half-second, stretched longer than his actual body, its edges blurred like a second recording played out of sync. Both shadows moved independently. I watched the slower one detach slightly from the baseboard, dragging behind him in a thin smear. The boards beneath it bent inward in a soft arc, as though responding to the weight of something invisible. He stopped a few feet from me. His eyes tracked the angle of my shoulders, adjusting in tiny increments, not in reaction to threat, but in an attempt to measure. The pupils shifted shape again, narrowing and widening at a calculated pace that resembled human scanning behavior. Then the footsteps returned, not from behind the mirror, not from the end of the hallway, but from both sides. The walls carried identical patterns, slow, uneven weight pressing down with measured intent. Each step aligned imperfectly with the next, like two separate bodies moving in parallel through the same corridor. I turned slightly toward the door. He adjusted his posture instantly, blocking the narrowest path with precision that belonged to something studying geometry rather than reacting to danger. The fur along his spine lifted, but the motion underneath his skin traveled in the wrong direction, a ripple moving counter to his breath. His eyes stayed empty, absorbing the shapes of the hallway without returning any shine. I took a step back. The floor creaked once, but the echo didn't follow me. It split again, traveling down both ends of the hallway rather than beneath my feet. The air behind me pressed lightly against my back, guiding rather than pushing. A thin movement brushed the ends of my hair, subtle but aligned with the shifts happening outside my field of vision. I moved toward the door. He tracked the angle of my step, turning his head slower than his body, as though maintaining two separate rhythms, one for posture, one for observation. The second shadow on the wall merged with the first for a moment, then separated again, dragging behind at a fixed delay. The steps on either side of the hallway matched mine, not closing in, not retreating, just keeping pace, adjusting distance with every shift of my weight. I reached the threshold. The cold seam beneath the door brushed across my ankles again, the temperature more consistent than anything inside the house. The air felt normal beyond the door frame, stable even, contrasting sharply with the warped patterns behind me. My dog, or the shape wearing his form, stood still at the corridor's edge. His posture measured the distance like he was recording it, calculating something about the space between us. His eyes didn't move now. They held steady, watching without blinking, absorbing the doorway without reflecting a single line of light. When my hand touched the door frame, something shifted at my back. No sound, just pressure. A presence adjusting its position in response to mine, aligning with the angle of my shoulders as though matching me. The boards behind me bent slightly, redistributing weight that didn't belong to my dog or me. The air folded inward, settling in thin sheets that pressed against the walls. One of the parallel footsteps paused. The other continued, its cadence unchanged. I didn't turn around. I only noted the movement, the pull of air along my back, the way the space responded as if it were recognizing my step. I crossed the final inch toward the door, recording the alignment of shadows behind me and the silent following presence, keeping time with my motion. This is where tonight's story ends. Please subscribe, like, and leave a comment to support the channel. Stay with us for more tales from the White Rabbit Witch horror story.